Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into a really, really tough custody battle.
Oh, this one's heavy.
Yeah. Lauzon versus Benedict went all the way to the Ontario Superior Court of Justice.
Lots of back and forth.
Oh, yeah. Tons of motions and orders, even police having to get involved to, make the custody exchanges happen.
Always a bad sign.
Definitely. So we've got, a whole mountain of documents for this one court filings, reports from social workers, even a voicemail that's, pretty chilling to hear.
Yeah, you really get a sense of how much damage one person's actions can cause.
So the basics. Tina Lauzon and Colby Benedict, they've got 3 boys together. Chase is the oldest. He's 18. Then there's Cruz. He's 12. And little Corbin, he's only 8.
And Colby, the dad, his behavior is really at the heart of it all.
Right. It's just constant withholding the kids, making all these accusations against Tina, even threats.
And it's not just random incidents. It's like a pattern,
Yeah.
A need to control everything.
Mm-hmm.
The impact on the kids, that's what gets me.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into all that. But first, maybe a little backstory. Tina and Colby, their story goes way back.
Way back. Started living together super young. Like teenagers.
Had their first son, Chase, when they were practically kids themselves.
Yeah, and you see that a lot in these cases. This young start, the power dynamics are all out of whack.
Like, Tina was supporting Colby through school, even helping him with his assignments, while also taking care of the baby.
And that kind of sets a pattern, right? Creates vulnerabilities.
And Colby was working as a mason, so he was often gone, for really long stretches of time.
Leaving Tina kind of stranded, especially since they were living on Cornwall Island. Not a lot of support there.
Isolated, 3 kids, partners always working, tough situation.
Isolation like that, it can really trap you in an abusive relationship. Makes it harder to reach out for help.
Yeah, and there were definitely signs of abuse even early on.
Police reports, right.
Uh-huh. Colby even broke Tina's nose once.
Really makes you think, how do we catch these red flags sooner? How do we stop things from spiraling like that?
Big questions. So things kept getting worse, and finally, Tina decides she has to get out.
Separation. That can be a trigger point for abusers. Like, they're losing control, things can get really volatile.
And that's exactly what happened. Colby takes the kids, keeps them from Tina for 6 months straight.
6 months.
6 months. And then he starts making these crazy accusations. Drugs, neglect, abuse, the whole 9 yards.
Classic parental alienation stuff.
Yeah.
Poisoning the well, trying to make the other parent look
Wow, he went all out. Called Child Protection Services on Tina multiple times.
Both CAS in Cornwall and ACFS on the island.
Yep. And you gotta imagine what that's like. Being accused of all that, knowing it's not true, and you can't even see your kids.
It's about control, right?
Yeah.
And it shows how important those investigations are. They gotta be thorough, impartial, gotta focus on the kids' well-being.
And not just one parent's twisted story.
Exactly.
And then Colby starts ignoring court orders, like the judge says when and how he can see the kids, and he just blows it off.
Had to get the police involved.
Multiple times. Plus, all the threats, the intimidation, Tina was terrified of him.
See, that's the problem, right? Restraining orders, all that, it only works if it's enforced. We gotta do better protecting victims.
And the kids, stuck right in the middle of all this chaos. Police showing up at custody exchanges, Colby coaching them to lie about their mom.
Imagine what that does to a child, to be in that environment, all that tension and fear.
Nightmare. And this is all documented, right? Colby, he gets so angry, he smashes a flower pot at Tina's brother's house with a tire iron.
Aggression like that, it's a huge warning sign. Therapy, anger management, something's got to change.
And then, get this, he tries to pull the kids out of school so they won't have to go to Tina's during her parenting time.
Disrupting their education, all to control the situation, their needs come last.
And the saddest part is the kids, they're getting interviewed by social workers. And it's clear Colby's been putting pressure on them to lie about Tina.
It's heartbreaking they get caught in this loyalty bind, feeling guilty, scared, just awful.
And remember those accusations about Tina using drugs.
Right, trying to paint her as unfit.
After all those investigations, both CAS and ACFS, nothing. No evidence whatsoever.
Shows why those investigations are so important. Got to cut through the lies, get to the truth.
It seems like the more the courts and social workers tried to help, the more Colby pushed back.
Yeah, blaming everyone else, seeing conspiracies everywhere. Classic way to avoid taking responsibility.
Tina was so scared she ended up moving in with her sister Lisa for safety.
But Colby still wouldn't back off.
Nope. Showed up at Lisa's house late one night. Another confrontation.
Stalking, harassment, total disregard for boundaries.
Yeah.
And despite all the legal stuff, he just kept pushing.
Oh, it gets worse. He slashed the tires on Tina's brother-in-law's car in Messina, New York.
So now it's not just family, it's escalating, going beyond. Another big red flag.
Thankfully, the court started to see through his act. Justice Desormeaux, she was the judge on some of the earlier motions. She straight up called him out on his manipulation.
Glad to hear someone was seeing through it.
It's a lot, right? We're talking real people's lives here. A whole lot of pain. What stands out to you so far?
Oh, it just reinforces how crucial it is to understand these dynamics. Domestic violence, parental alienation. The system needs to respond effectively. Prioritize the kid's safety above all else.
Absolutely. And Colby's actions, they had huge consequences. We'll dig into the court's final decision and how everything unfolded after a quick break. All right, we're back. So, after all that back and forth, all that evidence, what did the judge decide in the Lauzon v. Benedict case?
Well, the judge, Justice Leroy, he really came down hard on Colby. Saw right through all his games, He knew the guy was dangerous.
Dangerous how? In terms of protecting Tina and the kids, what did the judge actually do?
He gave Tina full control, made her the primary residential parent, and gave her sole decision-making responsibility for the kids. So, education, healthcare, all that, it's up to Tina.
Wow, that's a big deal. What about Colby? Did he still get to see his kids?
Justice Leroy suspended his parenting time completely. Said it was too risky for the kids. Even supervised visits weren't going to cut it.
So Colby was basically cut off from his kids, just like that.
Well, not entirely. The judge said Colby could maybe eventually see his kids again, but there were some pretty big conditions. Like, Colby had to prove he'd actually changed.
Prove it how? Like, what did the judge want to see?
First, therapy. Intensive therapy with a qualified therapist who had actually read through all the court stuff. Someone who could really get to the root of Colby's problems.
So not just any therapist would do?
Nope. Had to be someone who knew about domestic violence, trauma, parental alienation. Someone who could create a specific plan just for Colby.
Okay, that makes sense. So therapy was a big one. Anything else?
Justice Leroy also ordered a full mental health evaluation for Colby. Wanted to see if there were any underlying conditions contributing to his behavior.
So the judge was really digging deep here, taking no chances. And what about Tina? Did the judge put any extra protections in place for her?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He issued a 1-year restraining order against Colby. No contact with Tina or the kids, and he couldn't come anywhere near their home, work, or school.
Wow, so the judge was creating as much distance between Colby and Tina as possible.
Exactly. And he even said Colby couldn't pick the kids up from school. Didn't want any chance of a confrontation there.
It sounds like the judge was really worried about Tina's safety. Why? I mean, was there something specific that made him think Colby was a threat?
Remember Miss Savoya, the social worker assigned to the case? Well, she did a pretty thorough assessment of Colby and identified a bunch of risk factors that pointed to a possible uxoricide.
Uxoricide?
Yeah, the murder of a wife or intimate partner.
Whoa, that's intense.
It is. And this wasn't just some offhand comment. Miss Savoya, she's a professional. She'd interviewed everyone, reviewed all the evidence. She was really concerned.
So the judge took that very seriously. He wasn't messing around. But what about the kids? Did their feelings even matter in all this?
They did, thankfully. Miss Savoya made sure to interview the kids separately in a safe environment where they felt comfortable speaking their minds.
And what were they hoping for? Did they want to see their dad?
At first, yeah. They said they wanted equal time with both parents. And, it makes sense. Kids love both their parents, even when things are bad.
So even with all the fighting and the drama, they still wanted that connection with their dad.
Right. But as things got worse, Colby's behavior escalated, and their feelings started to shift. All that tension, the fear, it really took a toll on them.
Makes sense. I mean, they were basically living in a war zone.
Pretty much.
Oh.
And it made them rethink how much contact they wanted with their dad.
So what did they say? Did they still want to see him?
Corbin, the youngest, he was adamant. Said he didn't want any contact with his dad at all, didn't feel safe, even with supervision.
Poor kid.
I know, breaks your heart. And Cruz, the middle one, he said he was only open to supervised visits if his dad got help, if he changed.
So the kids were putting down boundaries too. They knew things had to change.
Absolutely. They were living it. They knew how unhealthy the situation was.
And what about Colby? How did he react when his sons said they were afraid of him?
He didn't get it. Even after everything, the evidence, the assessments, his own kids telling him they were scared, he just blamed everyone else, said it was all a conspiracy.
So no self-awareness whatsoever.
Nope. And that made it even harder to create a safe and stable environment for the kids.
The court documents mention Colby trying to involve some community resources like ARAP and ACFS. What was he hoping to gain from that?
It seemed like he was trying to weaponize them. Use them against Tina. He wasn't looking for help. He was looking for ammunition.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Take ARAP, for example. They're all about supporting the indigenous community, which Colby is a part of. But instead of accepting their help, he accused them of being biased, corrupt.
Alienating himself from potential allies.
Exactly. And he went so far as to threaten the principal of the kid's school. Got himself banned from school property.
Wow. Sounds like he was pushing everyone away. Anyone who disagreed with him was the enemy.
Pretty much. He couldn't handle any perspective that challenged his version of events.
What about ACFS, the Child Protection Agency on Cornwall Island? What was their involvement in this whole mess?
Well, they actually had some history with the family even before the separation. There were concerns about domestic violence.
So red flags were popping up even then.
Yeah, and they were close to intervening, maybe even removing the kids. But then Tina left.
And then Colby just kept feeding them these wild accusations about Tina.
Trying to use them against her, yeah.
Did it work? Did ACFS take action against Tina based on his claims?
Thankfully, no. Both ACFS and CAS did their investigations, and they found nothing to support Colby's accusations. They determined Tina was a good mother, providing a safe and loving home for her kids.
So Colby's attempts to sabotage Tina backfired.
They did. He was so focused on destroying her that he didn't realize he was destroying himself in the process.
There was an incident with a social worker, John Lauzon, that really jumped out at me. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, John Lauzon. He was a caseworker with ACFS who really tried to connect with Colby to help him understand how his behavior was impacting everyone. And at first, it seemed like Colby was receptive, he was more respectful, engaged.
So there was some hope.
Maybe. But then everything went sideways after an interview with Cruz and Corbin.
What happened?
Well, the boys were interviewed at a neutral location, and they admitted that their dad had been coaching them, telling them what to say about Tina.
They were basically being used as pawns.
Exactly, and they were scared of what would happen if they didn't say the right things.
So even though Colby claimed to love his kids, he was still manipulating them.
He was, putting his own needs above theirs. And when Mr. Lauzon tried to talk to Colby about it, he just lost it. Flew into a rage, accused everyone of being in cahoots against him.
Sounds like that was the end of the line for Mr. Lauzon.
It was. He told Colby he couldn't help anymore and urged him to get a lawyer if he felt he'd been wronged. Ultimately, Mr. Lauzon withdrew from the case.
It's a tough job being a social worker. You're dealing with people at their worst, trying to help them, and they just push you away.
It takes a special kind of person to do that work. They're dealing with families in crisis, trying to protect kids, and often facing a lot of resistance.
It's just a really sad situation all around. Tina trying to protect her kids, Colby spiraling out of control, and the kids caught in the middle. What was the final outcome?
So Colby got hit with a 1-year no-contact order. His parenting time was suspended. But the court did leave the door open a crack. They said if Colby could prove he'd changed, he might eventually be able to have a relationship with his sons again. But there was another twist to the story.
So Colby's got this court-ordered to-do list if he wants to see his kids again. But you said there was another twist. What happened?
Well, even though the court said Colby had to jump through all these hoops, the judge, Justice Leroy, he also made it clear that Tina had the final say.
Because she's the primary residential parent, right?
Exactly. She's got sole decision-making power, so even if Colby does everything the court said, Tina can still say no.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility. I mean, her kids love their dad, but she's also got to keep them safe. Must be a tough call.
Incredibly tough. And the judge recognized that. He wasn't trying to force Tina or the kids to just forgive and forget. He was just creating a framework, a possibility of reconciliation, but only on very specific terms.
This whole case is just, it's really shown how damaging domestic violence and parental alienation can be.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, are we doing enough to protect victims? Are our systems working the way they should?
Big question. So for our listeners, what's the takeaway from all this? What can we learn from the Lauzon v. Benedict case?
I think the biggest thing is awareness. Domestic violence, parental alienation, it's not always black and white. It's not always physical. It's about control, manipulation, using kids as weapons.
And if you're out there listening and any of this resonates with you, please know you're not alone. There are resources available, people who can help.
And remember, the kids, they're the ones who suffer the most in these situations. Their voices need to be heard. Their safety has to come first.
Powerful words. This case, it's been a real roller coaster. Shocking, heartbreaking, but ultimately, I think, hopeful. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and a huge thanks to our expert for sharing their insights.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to shed some light on these important issues.
And remember, folks, subscribe to The Deep Dive for more deep dives into fascinating and complex topics. Until next time, stay curious.